Cool. So I'm recording this one, all right, so you can see it later. This won't be like a really long lecture or anything. Mostly, it's kind of like I want to show you guys some topics, and also open up for questions for you guys to, if you have questions about the stuff that you've been doing, right? So I want to talk about different types of.
Are we gonna throw this up on Slack?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're going to talk about different types of CSS normalizers, right? I was asked a question yesterday, is that required on the exam? What is it? I want to kind of demystify that today so you guys know what we mean when we say we have a normalizer or a reset for our CSS, and how do we use one, right? And then I want to kind of get into position absolute, right? Position absolute is something that, when I first started learning it, I didn't really understand what it did. I only knew that I had to do this to make this thing work, but I didn't know why. And later on, when I started messing around with responsive design, position absolute was something that's very, very critical to having stuff, positioned right when it's responsive, right? And then we're going to get into some of the little tricks, like in CSS, you can do calculations. I'll show you one of the questions I was asked in an interview about CSS, and then we'll end off with some questions. Right? Cool. Okay, so let's go ahead and I'm gonna make a folder. We're gonna call this Thursday CSS demo. We're gonna open up Atom. And then we're just going to drag this folder into Atom here. In this folder, we're going to create a new file called index.html, right? And then we're going to go ahead and create a style.css. All right, so we got our style.css over here on the right side. We have our index.html on the left side. So as you guys know, once you have these extensions, Atom will autocomplete the syntax for you. So HTML, enter, we'll get all of this stuff, right? So here it's Thursday demo, and here in the body we can start writing our stuff. But before we do that, we want to link up the CSS, right? So link. And because the style.css file is already in the same directory, I can just put the name here, right? If it was in a folder, I would have to specify the path of the folder using, the correct path, right? Okay, so here we have our style.css. For the sake of just showing that the CSS is connected, we're going to say body background color red. Okay, so now if we open up Google Chrome and we drag our HTML inside of here, we should see that this is the page that we see. Okay, all right, so we're going to comment out this guy, but I want to show you guys something. In CSS, like in HTML rather, we have these different types of tags, right? And as you guys have seen, these different types of tags will oftentimes bring along some default styles that sometimes they're good, other times they're like, what the hell? I don't want that, right? So sometimes you have an H tag or something, it'll maybe make a little margin on top or like a little padding, and you're like, oh no, that's not what I want. So you have to explicitly get rid of that in your code. Now, what a normalizer does, it kind of it's just a CSS file that you link to your project. But in that CSS file, somebody else wrote that, and you can download this from the internet. And what it does, it gets rid of all of those default things, right? And this is good for a few reasons. Number one, because sometimes you want to just start from a blank canvas and give every style, write everything that you want to style yourself explicitly. So nothing is inferred, everything is under your control, right? Another thing is those default styles will differ in different browsers. So Internet Explorer might give you like a 13 point pixel margin, but then Google Chrome might give you a 10 pixel margin. So it'll look slightly different with the default things inside of different browsers. So for browser compatibility, it's also a good practice to reset your CSS, right? So you can download you can download those files online. I have some files that I used on my other projects. So let's see, we have this portfolio site project that I showed you guys the other day. And if we go into the code here, we have our client, static CSS. And here I have index CSS, mobile.css, and reset.css. The reset.css is just a file that I downloaded off the internet. So I'm just going to copy that file, and I'm just going to paste it inside of my thursdayCSSDemo, like that. So now we have a reset.css. And now if we go back and look at our code, we should see that we have a reset.css right here, right? It's CSS, so I'm going to drag it to the right side. And just so you guys can see, I'm going to make it the true size, right? So in the reset.css, and all of this stuff, it's written by somebody else. So this is all of the stuff that kind of just negates all of the default styling, right? And there's other ones that you can get from the internet that are more comprehensive. There's different kind of variations. You can dig around and find the one that you like. If you want to use this one, I can send it on Slack. It'll be in the code when I upload the video. It'll be in the GitHub repo in the description of the video. But feel free to play around with that. It's not necessary. It's not like a requirement or anything. Really, it's kind of like I prefer to use it because I really hate, and this is just personally, I hate having other styles that I don't understand just appear, and I'm not sure what's doing that. And a big gripe I have with some frameworks like Twitter Bootstrap, for example, is a CSS framework, meaning that you just download their CSS file and it has a bunch of these classes, and you use the classes that they have defined in the CSS in your HTML to make it look like pretty. So you don't have to write any CSS, you just write the right class to get it to look like that. But with those kind of frameworks, sometimes you'll get some styles and it'll just completely mess up everything else because there's a bunch of CSS that you didn't write and then you don't know, right? So I like to know exactly what CSS I'm doing. And all of the projects that I do with the animations and stuff, I always have a reset and I write everything from scratch. Right? It takes a little more time, but I think it's worth it in the long run. Right? So that's what CSS normalizers do, right? I think CSS lines. I think if you just search that, normalize.css is a big one. So you can go to this guy's GitHub repo and you can download the normalize.css right here. Right? So this will be the file that normalizes everything. Right? Question?
So to make this apply to what you're doing, you just put it in the same folder and it'll automatically apply?
You put it in the same folder and you have to link it. Right? Yeah. So right here, we're going to link it. This guy is called reset.css. So now it'll work. So let's, yeah, you can link as many CSS files as you want. Yeah. So just to demonstrate, right, I am going to comment this out and we're going to have an h1 tag. Okay. H1 tag. It looks pretty big and it's bold, right? So now if we make our reset.css link to our file, see? It got rid of all the default styling, even the margins and stuff. So there's no margins, it's literally just vanilla. It's as if it were a p tag or anything like that. So there's no difference between these different h tags now. All of them are the same size, right? And sometimes, in the beginning, if you're kind of lazy, you can just use the h tags to make it look big. But later on, when you get into projects that you want to put some care into, you want to make sure that everything is perfect. So you want to give it your own style instead of to make it specific. Okay. Any questions on the reset.css stuff? All right. Good.
So some of it's a preference thing, but it's also because browsers don't support.
Yeah, that's another reason, right? It is known that different internet browsers have different default stylings for these different tags. So that's just another variant that you have to worry about. Question?
How do we know if what we're setting as our style is the correct one for the different browsers?
if you give your style, if you say, hey, H1, I want you to font size to be 24 pixels, that'll be uniform for all of them, for all of the different browsers, right? So let's see. This not hooked up. Let's say 50. That's weird. Let's see, color, red. Okay. Okay. I don't know why this is happening, but I'm gonna see if this would work. Okay, it worked. So it turned out that the reset.css, I think it overwrote. It didn't apply.
Would it matter which link you put first in your HTML? Like if you
Oh, that's right. That's a very good observation there. I think that's the problem, right? So we can try this again. So yeah, that's good. Okay, so it's not big, but if I switch these two,
Wait, what was the thing that Jake nailed? What did we do?
yeah. So the way that CSS is applied, it is run procedurally, right? So if you give something a style of red, and then later on you give it the style of blue, it's the second one that gets applied. It overrides the first one. So it's run procedurally, right? So that's why we wanted this reset to be first, reset everything, and then your styles would now be applied. Okay, so if you give the same element two different styles, it'll apply procedurally. But there's also this thing that I did with the exclamation point important, that will say that regardless of what other styles you give it later, always use this one. Right? That's what the important does. So if there's multiple assignments to the same tag, use the one that is important. Right? But
that actually is important, like the exclamation doesn't make it not important, right? That's something that's...
No. This is not, this isn't JavaScript.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank
This
you.
is CSS, right? And also, that was really good. And also another thing I wanted to show you guys, a shortcut, right? So let's say I have this line here, and I want to move this line around, but I don't want to be like, oh, I have to copy this, and then I paste it somewhere else, right? If I want to move this line around, in Atom, I don't know about the other text editors, but in Atom, you have to, as long as your mouse, your cursor is on that line, you can hold down Control, Command, and then up and down to move this around, like that. So it's really easy to do. It won't mess up any other formatting. So we want the reset to be on top and then the style on the bottom, right? Yep.
Can you highlight like a block of like multiple lines and move all of them?
Yep. Yeah. So this might save you some time. Question.
Is there a quick command on Windows?
Windows, I think, is just Control. Control and then up and down arrow keys. So for every text editor, it's guaranteed there's some way to do that. It's just the keys are different. Yeah, it's just the keys are...
Command what?
In Mac, it's Control, Command, and then up and down.
I think a list of all these keyboard shortcuts.
Okay, so
I mean, that's in the documentation on the software.
yeah, it's Control plus Command plus up slash down, like that. Oops. Okay, let's move this guy over to the CSS. There we go. So notice that to cut is Control X. Yeah. So on Mac is Control Command up and down. Windows is just Control without the command and up and down. Okay. So all right, moving on. Let's talk about position absolute. Right. It's here. Let's do this. So back in I want to say last summer, like around June or May, I interviewed with Glassdoor, right? The company that you find jobs on. And we had like 3 different phone interviews, and then one of the phone interviews was a guy that asked me a bunch of questions about HTML and CSS, right? So the question he asked me was like, okay, so I have this, so let's save that. So he's like, so we were on like this video chat, and we had the screen and the same text editor, and we were editing it at the same time. And he was like, okay, so I have a div like that, and this is called, let's say div 1, and then this div has a class called div 1, and it has a width of, let's say, 50% of the browser, of the window, and it has a height of 400 pixels, like that, and it has, let's say, a background color of blue, like that. Okay, so now let's take a look. So we have this, and as we move the window, it kind of gets resized. Okay, and I think he did a percentage for the height as well. So let's say 50% width, 50% height, like that. So this thing is it's dynamic. Let's see. Let's do view height. All right. So in addition to these percentages, you can also use what's called VW and VH. This is the view width. The VH is view height, right? So this will be 50% of what I can see for the width, and also 50% of the height, right? So this guy is totally dynamic now. And inside of this div, he said, I'm making another div. This is called div 2, and this div dot div 2, I'm going to make this a square with the width of 100 pixels and the height of 100 pixels, and I'm going to give you a background color green, like that. Okay, so the square div is inside of my responsive dynamic div, like that. And he was like, okay, so can you center this green box inside of the blue box? Regardless of how I change my screen, I always want it to be in the very middle, right? So there's a number of ways you can do it, right? So the first thing I can think of is like, okay, if I wanted to center it horizontally, it's really easy to do, right? So I can make it, let's say, margin 0 auto, right? Would that work? Let's take a look. Yeah, there we go. That's easy. It's one line of code. But, and also, no matter how wide it is, it's always going to stay centered. But what if I want to center it vertically? What do I do? How do I center it vertically? Any ideas? Vertical align center? Is that going to work? We got to put it in the div 1, right? In the parent div. Vertical line middle. Didn't work. Okay. So at that point, I didn't really know about these vertical line things. What I did was to say, oh, I'm just going to make it position absolute, and I'm going to do a calculation to calculate this stuff, right? So what I did was I didn't do this margin 0 auto business because I wanted to start out with the position absolute. But now this is the tricky part. Now if this guy says this div is not always aligned to the left and the top like that, if I give it like just some random margin, say margin left, let's say 20%, and then margin top 27%, right? Let's see what this looks like now. Okay. Now let's take a look at what we got, right? So it's got some crazy margin now, All right, maybe that was too much. So let's
And
make.
that would be 20 and 27% of the window.
Yep. So let's say we have 3% and 7%, right? So now this is now super dynamic, right? If I make this green block position absolute, and I say, hey, from the top, I want you to be 0, and from the left, I want you to be 0, where do you think this is going to be? Is this still going to be here? Or is it going to be here?
Yeah.
Up at the very top, right? Because it's position absolute relative to the window. And the reason why it's relative to the window, even though this div2 is inside of div1, is that when I set this div2 to be position absolute, the first thing it's going to do, it's going to look at its immediate parent, which is div1, right? It's going to say, hey, div1, are you position absolute or position relative? In this case, no, right? So it's going to look at this guy's parent, which is the window now. So the window will be the end, the default, if none of the parents before it have position absolute or relative, right? Position relative we covered yesterday, right? Or was it Tuesday? It was like basically it doesn't move anything else except itself. So if you give an element position relative without any kind of description, it just stays where it is. Doesn't change anything visually. But if I give this division 1 position relative, now when the div2 is absolute, it's going to look at div1 and it's going to say, okay, you're my parent. Are you position absolute or relative? Yeah, you're relative. So now if I save this and we refresh, you're going to see the green one is absolute with reference to the blue box now, right? Question.
Is there a default setting?
What do you mean?
You don't define that. Is there a default setting like this?
Default setting for the, yeah, so it's going to be, I think the position, like what kind of different positions do they have? So I think it's just by default, it doesn't have a position property. It's just like null for that, right? So all of these are I think all of these are special, right? And we'll learn these things later on. But for now, just know that absolute, it'll look for the first parent with either position absolute or position relative. So I can make this position absolute and it'll be the same, right? Didn't change. So that's what I did in the interview, and I said, hey, if I make it position relative, then I can move this block anywhere I want to, right? But then the thing is, like, I can give it a top and I can give it a left, but it's going to be changing. The top and left, you know, it's not a fixed number because depending on the blue box, it needs to have, you know, it needs to change. So you need to use a percentage, right? So what I ended up doing was this. So the top was going to be 50% of, so basically what you want to do is you want the top to be 50% of the height, but if you do that, then you're going to get this, right? So it's 50%. I need to move it up half of its own height, right? So therefore I need to do a calculation. Now you can do calculations in CSS and you do it like this. So you type, let's make this bigger so you can see it, right? So there. All right, so calc with the parentheses and then 50% minus half of my height, which is 50 pixels, right? Because my height is 100 pixels, calc 50% minus 50 pixels. That will give me perfectly vertically centered, right? So no matter how high this guy is, it's always going to be vertically centered. So for the left, I'm going to do the same thing. Calc 50% minus 50 pixels. And now, if we refresh this guy, it's going to be perfectly centered regardless of how big the blue box is, right? And the thing to note is that these percentages they have the same kind of property as the position absolute in the terms that it's going to look for the first parent that is position relative or absolute to set that percentage of, right?
Is there any way to make so the minus 50 pixels? Is there any way to make that dynamic so that, let's say you spent hours making changes and then your div 2 you were like it's no longer 100 pixels, it's 200 pixels, then it would just automatically adjust
Right.
that? Or
So there's no way to do that in vanilla CSS, but as companies have like big design teams and they build more complex CSS, there are these things called CSS preprocessors, and some of you might have heard it. It's like less SAS, LESS, SASS. There's different types, but what it is you write your CSS using those programs, and it compiles it into CSS. So what it allows you to do is create variables for things. So I can say a variable for this guy's width is 200, and then everywhere in my CSS I'm using that variable, and instead of changing every single one, I just change that one variable and change all of it, right? And also a lot of companies do that with colors, like Facebook. My colors are this kind of blue, that kind of white, So they have all these variables for main logo blue, small logo blue or something, and then they'll just use all that throughout. So when they change one thing, it kind of just trickles down to everybody because they have thousands and thousands of lines of CSS. They can't go over every one and change each one individually, right? So those are CSS preprocessors. We're not going to really worry about that here. I don't think it's ever covered on any chapter in the platform, but it's something that you'll want to kind of learn more about as you after you graduate and you build more stuff in your portfolio, right?
So the parent has to have position relative.
Yeah.
The child would have to have a position absolute to be corresponding to the parent.
Yeah. So the child is the one that has the position absolute. That's set. He's the guy who has the absolute, so you can move him around. Now the question is, who is he moving him around relative to, right? Because when I say top, you need to have a definition of who is the top, right? Top to what, right? You need to have a reference frame. The reference frame is the thing that we want to kind of manipulate with these position relative absolutes. Because if I take this guy out, then all of a sudden it's going to be for the window, right? So notice that it's always centered on the window. But if I add this guy, because this is the immediate parent, then it's going to be centered relative to his immediate parent. It's the same thing. I showed that earlier, I think, right? So no change. It's still the same.
Another div under that, and then you make that one absolute. Would it be absolute to the green one?
Yes. Yeah. So if I made another div here, let's say div 3, and I say dot div 3, let's say heights is going to be 20 pixels, width is 20 pixels, position absolute, top, let's say 20 pixels, left 20 pixels, like that, and I'm going to make you background color red. Then because this guy is absolute and div 3 is inside of div 2, so it's going to be this guy is going to be absolute relative to div 2. All right, so if we look at that, yeah, see? And in addition to top and left, you can also make these things like bottom and right, for example. Right, so you want to give it two coordinates, the x coordinate and the y coordinate. So then it'll be relative to the bottom and to the right. Okay, so I think that covers position absolutes, what it does. It's really flexible. Using the calculations, you can have some crazy things that are super dynamic, right? Any other questions in general about the stuff that you guys were doing yesterday? Yeah.
So would you suggest us to start using percentages for height and width for, like, instead of using pixels? Because I know you use percentages and that's why it's able to do the feel, but I know you also said before that it just gets a little more complex.
Yeah. I think whatever it is that is easier for you, I feel like because right now we're learning it, doing the pixels and doing that is fine. I think as you learn more about CSS and do more complex projects, you're gonna find that almost all the time you're gonna be using pixels. Yeah. And in addition to pixels, sometimes we'll have like, let's say H1 here, right? Some text. Right now I made it font size 50 pixels, right? So it's 50 pixels. But if you open the source code for all of my projects, you'll see that I never use pixels for font size. I use the percentages for font size as well. So here I might say 2em, and that's just 2 times what it is that it's normally it should be, right? So in this case, because I did the reset CSS, the default is always 1, right? So 2em would be twice as big as that, right? So here, if we refresh, you see that's twice as what it should have been just by default, right? Sometimes, we can have it smaller, like 0.6 em, and then it'll be like super small like that, right? So you can have these, like 5 em would be like just really big, right? So having things being able to change dynamically it's you kind of you need to do it, and later on as you do it more and more, it's going to become a habit. But for now, I want to say just do it the way that you're comfortable doing it, because you're learning it and you're starting out. Don't worry about if you really don't understand position absolute, then don't try to force yourself to do position absolute. Just get it, pixel push it to the way that it looks right? For the exam, when we grade it, we're not going to care if you did position absolute or you just pixel pushed it exactly that pixel, right? Because if it looks the same to me, then it's good, right? So just do it however you feel comfortable for now. Later on, because there's just so much stuff that you can learn, and we're just kind of scratching the surface of what there is, right? As you can see, like with the different animations and transitions and response, like there's just so much stuff. So for now, just focus on the basics, and if you have, if you're stuck on anything, just feel free to ask me, right? Cool. Stop this now.